2 years. We just hit an anniversary. 2 years.
Oh my God, you're absolutely correct. 2 years.
Oh.
All right. Hello, everybody. It's been a long 2 years. So this is Housing, Health, and Human Services Committee, March 2022 meeting. I am Maria Ortiz, co-chair of this committee, along with Joe. You want to introduce yourself?
Joe Restuccia, co-chair, Housing, Health, and Human Services.
And we meet the third Thursday of every month. If you're new here, per the governor's order, we're still meeting remotely. This was going to be a in-person meeting, but
our last remote meeting and in person, right?
Yeah, this was going to be in person, but the governor extended the order so we can meet remotely. I always encourage people to sign up for the CB4 e-blasts. You can get the agenda there, the links to the documents for the meetings beforehand. It's also just a great neighborhood resource. If this is your first time being here, there's really two things to remember. After each presentation or committee discussion, the public then gets to speak or ask questions and comment. In order to do that, you need to raise your hands. It's usually on the bottom part of the screen. I don't know if anyone's calling in. I don't think so.
No.
Is anyone calling in? Okay. And second is just after the attendees speak, the discussion goes back to committee and we discuss items. Sometimes we decide to write a letter of support or make recommendations for something. And on our agenda tonight, the first thing we're discussing is the governor's proposal to raise the statewide residential FAR cap. And Joe is the expert, so he's going to explain that very well. Are you doing sugar cubes today?
I'll try.
Okay.
So our first item tonight was in the Dropbox. We have a framework for discussion. This matter is being discussed already discussed at Clinton Hell's Kitchen Land Use Committee. It's being discussed tonight at HHHS and again being discussed at the Chelsea Land Use Committee, and then being discussed further as we get through this process. Our goal is to probably talk about it this month and next month, and then take action on it from a full board perspective the following month. There was a very lively and very full discussion at Clinton Hell's Kitchen Land Use. And we have the same framework of points for discussion tonight that we want to go through to get people's sense or thoughts about it. I'm going to put those up on the screen. Oh, but we didn't do our introductions, Maria, of everybody. All the committee members, sorry.
Apologies. So let's start with Betty.
Betty McIntosh, member of the Housing, Health, and Human Services Committee.
Leslie.
Leslie Williams, member of the committee.
Katie.
Katie Stokes, member of the committee.
Roberta
Barnett, member of the committee.
Travis
Rogers, member of the committee.
Public member.
Public member. Thank you, public member.
You could also change your title if you want. Josephine.
Hi, Josephine, member of the committee.
Jeffrey, you are next on my screen.
Thanks, Maria. Jeffrey LaFrancois, chair of CB4.
JD.
Jean Daniel, member of the committee.
Oh, maybe I sound clearer now. I put the mouthpiece close to my mouth.
Yes.
Dolores.
Okay, Dolores Rubin, member of the committee.
Nellie, you got to introduce yourself too.
You have no audio.
There was no audio.
You're on mute.
But you weren't on mute, but there was no audio.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Nellie Gonzalez, Assistant District Manager for Manhattan Community Board 4.
Well, Nellie, you know I love you. That's why I made you do that. And Sabrina.
Hi, Sabrina Revron, committee member.
Thank you. Thanks, Joe.
Okay, so let's get to our first item. And here are the points we'll be talking about tonight. Can everyone see the document, or should I make it bigger? Is that better?
Can you lift it up a little bit? Oh, no, I see. Never mind.
Got it?
Joe, if I could just, before
Oh yeah, Jeffrey, go ahead, sure.
we dive in here.
Yeah.
So these points are very land use specific that you're going to lay out for folks this evening. And you know, this came up last month because this is an idea that's being entertained at the state level, though it's no longer,
In the budget.
well, neither house put it forward.
Right.
So now the governor and the legislature starts to dance, and they will do so through the end of the month, and we'll see whether or not it ends up in the budget or not. This, came about because it was a proposal on the table, and more so because I think we can all universally agree. We spend a lot of time talking about housing, the housing crisis, and then the absolute desperate need across, not just in particular in our district, but across the city, a need for housing. And I brought this to the executive committee. We brought it to full board, where it was referred back to 3 appropriate committees to have a much deeper discussion. And at the root of it is about a need for more housing and what options are on the table that we can explore and be a part of the conversation to get to figuring out how we can best bring more housing into our community. I wasn't at the land use meeting last week, but I certainly tuned in after the fact, one of the benefits of that YouTube channel. And so just wanted to join tonight's discussion and sort of thank you for the moment to sort of tee that up from the housing perspective tonight, because this committee is housing, not land use. And so just sharing that and looking forward to hearing what folks have to say.
Thank you, Jeffrey. So put this back on the screen, and part of this to be able to have the conversation is also talking about how this whole thing works and what is FAR and how it works. So I want to note, first and foremost, there is no cap on overall FAR. What is FAR? That's floor area ratio. So you have to think for a moment, right? And Nellie, we're missing that one slide. That'll be helpful if you can find that. That we are talking about how many square feet you can build on a lot. And FAR is a ratio, floor area ratio. So if you have a lot that is 100 feet by 100 feet, and you have a 1 FAR ratio, you can build 10,000. That's a lot of 10,000 square feet. You could build 1 FAR will get you 10,000 feet. If you have an FAR of 12, that's 120,000 feet. But the key with FAR is if you cover the entire lot with a 1 FAR, you get a 1-story building. If you cover half the lot, you get a 2-story building. If you cover a quarter of the lot, you get a 4-story building. So remember, there's very little FARs that are that low at 1. And in high density districts, the maximum residential FAR statewide is 12. So that would mean that lot with the 1 FAR, if you covered 20, if you had a 12-story building and you had a 10 FAR ratio, you can easily get to 48 stories very quickly. So that's the analogy of the sugar cubes. It's the same number of sugar cubes that gets distributed differently on a lot. So first, let's just go through quickly. Yeah, and Nellie just sent me that slide. Let me put that up so people can see it a little bit easier.
I also added it to Dropbox.
Yep.
Joe, I just want to interject for a second. I just need clarification for something. And you've taught me this before and I forgot, and you just said it, if it covers a quarter of the lot, it's 4 stories?
I'm going to show you this right here. The one slide shows you so easily. So here you have FAR, right? You have 1 FAR. If you cover the entire lot, it's 1 story. You cover half the lot, 2 stories. Cover a quarter of the lot, 25%, it's 4 stories. So it's all about how that's called massing, how you distribute the FAR on a lot, get you the number of stories, but the square footage stays the same. So in the concept first, I just want to make sure, are there any questions or thoughts about that from the committee members?
Actually, Joe, just real quickly, I think you said in residential areas statewide, it's limited to 12 FAR. Is that right?
Right. So I was first talking about the general idea. Any questions about the general FAR, how it works? Give me a no or a yes. No, we're good. Okay. So the next thing we're talking about here is FAR, floor area ratio, is not capped for general building, meaning commercial building or manufacturing type building. It is capped for residential building. And that means if you have a zoning that allows you to build residential, the statewide cap anywhere in the state is a maximum of 12 FAR. This discussion tonight is about whether the 12 FAR cap could be modified, changed, or lifted in the state. When the law first came out, it was a broad law, and now it's changed to say only in jurisdictions over 1 million people, which means it only will apply to New York City. So that was the thing so this discussion really is whether or not the 12 FAR residential cap will be lifted or changed in New York City. The next thing is, where are these zones located? The 12 FAR zones are mostly on wide streets, which we call avenues, or on narrow streets in commercial districts. So you can have a downtown, you can have a very narrow street, but it'd be a very high FAR, and you can build residential. In general, how do you get to a density higher than 12 FAR? You get there because you have certain kinds of zoning bonuses. You build a plaza, you improve the subway, you renovate or preserve a theater, you do something on the waterfront. That gets you a higher FAR in exchange for some amenity for the entire city. Or when you have special zoning districts with very complicated mechanisms, things like to pay bonds for the Hudson Yards Special District, or improve the High Line, or in Midtown East to do public realm improvement, like around Grand Central, like the closing of Vanderbilt Avenue. Those are bonuses that get you much higher than an FAR. A lot of the bonuses are really to get you from 12 FAR to 14.4. But when you get to Hudson Yards Special Zoning District, that's the highest density in the entire city. And the blocks between 33rd and 35th Streets, between 10th and 11th Avenues, have an FAR of 33. However, with all of those various zoning bonuses, the highest residential FAR ever is 12. So that's the sort of stage we're setting here. So here are some of the items that we should consider and think about it. Should we talk about removing the residential FAR versus increasing it to a specified number? If this change happens, should there be height limits imposed? One of the concerns that's been discussed a lot is there are usually not height limits anywhere in parts of zoning. It's only in certain special zoning districts or in something called a contextual district, and this would not be one of those. So therefore, should there be a height limit that goes along with an FAR, residential FAR increase? How do we ensure that affordable housing is part of any increased FAR? Because that's not, it's what Jeffrey talked about, a general housing crisis, that's accurate, but there's nothing in the state law that says increased FAR will yield affordable housing. So as we talked about it at the Land Use Committee, Executive Committee, that if there's affordable housing, there should be affordable housing. And then we go to some of the things we deal with all the time. Affordable housing should be distributed throughout the building. The last thing we want are poor doors or poor floors, and none of this where you put the rental below and super duper condos on the top floors and a combination of market rate and affordable below. The same apartment finishes we talk about all the time. And then building amenities that should be accessible to all residents, as we talked about. Or should we consider allow a residential FAR increase only in locations where the zoning already exceeds 12 FAR versus locations where new rezoning would increase the overall FAR. And the last piece that we've talked about a lot in the Land Use Committee, but also in this committee, is when there's an increased use, you have an increased need for services such as fire, police, EMS, schools, daycare centers. We saw in Hudson Yards huge increases in FAR, and we did not get the concomitant services figured out, cited, and funded. So how do you require both the space and the funding for demand to deal with this increased demand of these public services? So let us just take a moment to absorb some of this. And I think we'll start in this first discussion, which is our our goal is on this whole FAR issue is to get more affordable housing. Is that accurate? I'll just go around the room quickly on this. Roberta.
So I think that the answer is yes. And I may elaborate a little bit. I think that we have a demonstrated housing supply crisis. That crunch is overwhelmingly on the affordable side, but it exists throughout the market. Past about decade, this is comptroller's report, I think added 500,000 new people, 100,000 new units of housing. We're feeling the crunch. Over the past year, the Miller-Samuel Element report put the vacancy rate in West Side and downtown as somewhere around 8%. It's now gone down to below 2%. It's clear that we have, at least based on my opinion, and I think some of the data, that we have an overall supply problem. I think that it's important that it include both market rate and affordable units, depending on what we're able to get here.
Dolores?
So I'm going to be a little bit of a broken record from the land use. My biggest concern are unintended consequences. And while we're all on the housing committee, we all are 100% committed to trying to pull whatever levers we can to provide affordable housing. As presented, this proposal, especially where it is specifically because they've added the size of the municipality, is specifically to New York, to me, does not give any type of, even if we're stating it, even if we ask for it as a community, it is not giving enough concrete, clear guarantees that this is to deal with the affordable housing and the fact that we don't have enough housing for those that want to stay in the city and are in that middle range. We talked about this at land use extensively. Some of the unintended consequences can really be a problem. We have right now, this moment, a good amount of affordable stock that disappears because one landlord figures out how to go ahead and do something to their building, and then the whole building ends up mysteriously having no more tenants and then has to be demolished. We have people who are already siting at new areas, in areas close to Hudson Yards. Contextually, it's large already, so we should be able to go higher. They're not folks that are looking to bring affordable housing. They're looking to go ahead and build higher for higher profit. I think that we run the risk of taking off the cap without thinking about all the rest of the planning, of allowing real estate to go ahead and call the shots and not solve our problems. And one other point that I'll make about Hudson Yards, I wasn't on the board through the negotiations for the agreement, but we saw as Hudson Yards came online that many things that were negotiated and asked for, they're not here. We don't have additional fire. We don't have additional police. We have got one school, asked for 2. We don't have all of the transportation that we asked for. So the good intention to say, let's go ahead and take off the cap, get as much housing stock as possible that we can make affordable. When we don't take care of all of the rest of the planning in there, we actually do harm to our community. We're not seeing it now in Hudson Yards because of the pandemic, and not as many people have moved in. But I think when that whole area comes online and it's full, not just with commercial, but with residential, we'll find that services will be strained. And that's my biggest concern of those unintended consequences.
So could we stay on that? Because this is a huge subject to discuss. Could we stay on that subject first? That if there is some sort of change in the cap, do we agree that it should come with a requirement for increased public services, both reserving the space and the funding for those services?
I would say absolutely. Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Maria's fine. No, but I'm because that's such a big thing. We've got to break it down into the digestible chunks. So Katie, you were next. So can you speak to that issue?
Yes, but I just actually wanted to ask a clarifying question.
Yeah.
So.
And then you will speak
Dolores-
to that issue.
Yes, and then I'll speak to that issue. But so Dolores, you just said that you're concerned about unintended consequences from this proposal. Is there a specific proposal right now we're looking at and talking about, or is it just the general idea? I'm just trying to understand what we're reacting to.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm reacting to removing the caps where there is no cap.
Just an unlimited proposal for unlimiting the cap. That's what you're
exactly. So that they say
Yes.
in New York City can have unlimited FAR for residential.
So
Okay.
That's my concern.
let me try to reframe it before Jeffrey jumps in. I don't want it to be a debate between Jeffrey and the committee, right? This is really important. It is merely the governor having a proposal to allow municipalities, meaning New York City, to lift a cap. That's all it does. It gives you home rule. The problem that Dolores brought up is with home rule, where we are able to change things, Hudson Yards is a major rezoning. Some of the issues that we just outlined were not addressed or taken care of. So that's
Right. Okay.
why, and we don't know now that it's not in the budget, what a new version of that may be. One of the things I think Jeffrey's really on the ball about is we should be saying, here are the issues and the things that
Right.
need to be considered if any action like this is taken whatsoever.
Right.
Because
And
if
that
we
was my
don't get-
impression. Yeah. Okay.
we don't get part of this discussion, then we can get stuck with, some wise guy at Department of City Planning saying, oh yes, FARs of 40, no problem, just do it. I mean,
Right.
and it's not
And
gonna be city planning, it's gonna be some, like the related companies paying a lobbyist to do it, so.
So yeah, and I very much think that yes, that in order to be part of the discussion, that we should say we would only be interested, or we would only support lifting the cap if a whole variety of issues are addressed. And my understanding was that that's what this discussion was supposed to be
Exactly.
about. So I don't think anybody's proposing, oh yeah, let's just support it and see if it works out well. I don't think any of us feel that. That I think that we all recognize that there need to be constraints and a framework, and nobody would support just a willy-nilly. So
A
to that
blanket,
end,
a blanket.
yes.
Now to the public service question.
Exactly. Well, so I guess it certainly sounds like that we want to have sort of a response that says, or that we'd be interested in exploring, like, we would be interested in this if the following were addressed explicitly. If we were promised, if our district or our city, whatever, if we are promised that whatever, either 100% or 75% something is going to go towards, of the increase would go towards affordable housing, like some percentage, that there would be, extra public services, and then we would enumerate them just like they're already on your sheet about like what would need to come in. So it sounds like that's the kind of thing that we want to address. And as for me specifically, I would definitely support exploring this. I do like the idea, I think, Joe, that was on the sheet about not only talking about supporting an FAR, but maybe the height cap, so that people don't worry like, oh my God, it could be, a 100-story building next to my little, whatever, short building. But I do think that we also obviously have to say there needs to be a significant focus on affordable housing. And, but I agree also with Roberta's point that we shouldn't say that it all has to be, but that it has to be a significant percentage.
Oh, Leslie.
No, can I just add a critical point of information that didn't come across? So if the statewide number increases, that doesn't affect local zoning. Just because the state cap gets lifted doesn't automatically mean all of a sudden anywhere a massive residential building can go up. Local zoning still applies. And so if in one of these high density districts, ours, Hudson Yards, Financial District, Upper East Side, were to undertake a rezoning, it would also trigger local zoning mechanisms, which right now do include measures of affordable housing, requirements for affordable housing.
No, they
there's
don't.
a macro discussion that's happening that then does not override local zoning automatically without further action by the municipality.
Okay, so let me try to put that in a little more perspective. Absolutely.
No, just hold on. The perspective is if the state lifts the cap, that does not mean automatically everybody can build higher. right?
Without question. However,
Okay.
we live in a city that is driven by real estate. We have to keep our feet on the ground about this, okay? A city driven by real estate and people with high power lawyers and zoning experts and lobbyists will try to determine ways to make this serve them and not serve the public. I think we can all agree upon that, right? As a general note of caution, right? So once you lift or modify what the cap is, you will increase that action will enable owners of land to seek changes in zoning because they will have an increased value on their land. If someone is sitting in an area that's a commercial zone that now could be an FAR of 18 for residential, and they could have, well, they're going to come and say, I want to do a zoning change to city planning back and forth. The last possibility we want to ever be in as a city is having a fight about, oh, but don't you want more affordable housing in exchange for a gargantuan building in a place that is not zoned for that? So one of the discussions that we talked about a lot, and I want to maybe focus us back on this and then go to Leslie, is should there be a lifting of the cap or just an adjustment of the cap? So if people can talk about that as a point. In other words, not a blanket, it is whatever the municipality says. It can go from 12 to 14 or 16, whatever. I don't know what it should be, but the idea that it could be a number. Leslie?
Yeah, I'm concerned with the ability to monitor the requirements that we put into place. For example, what happened at the MTA site? I mean, we were given the approval to get whatever we were supposed to get back in 2009, and now we are in 2022, and we are not getting what we expected. If we agree to this, what guarantees can we get from the authorities, whoever they may be, state or city, that we get exactly what we are requesting? How do we make that? How would we make that possible?
So remember, we're not agreeing. We're having a discussion about what we recommend.
Well, I know that, but I'm just saying we need to put that in, to build that into the discussion.
Right. And part of the idea is that it should be maybe some of these things should be embodied in the state law, because we can't just rely upon the city, to wit MTA, to just do all the things nicely. And this is a big lever here. Josephine, you're next.
Okay, so if there is an agreement to lift or adjust, are we then saying that those public services that were promised under Hudson Yards be fulfilled, or is that just too late? Is nothing can be done about that?
That horse has left the barn.
Okay.
Betty?
Yeah, hi. I've been thinking about this and I have massive reservations about it. It might be possible to fine tune this more. I feel like if we only say something general like affordable housing should be part of this, for example, I think it might work or be more sensible to have sort of a formula. In other words, if you get X number of square feet increase from 12 to 14 or something, for each square feet, you have to provide X number of affordable units. I'm just freelancing on this. But let me
X square feet to Y affordable square feet of apartments.
You get the idea, like that you tie it into something, you just don't give a vague thing. The other idea I had was about the impacts for fire and police, that maybe if you go beyond 12, you have to do something like an environmental impact statement, and that you analyze the additional people or cars or whatever it is, like an EIS. Maybe it isn't. Anyway, that's my other, that I think it has to be tightened up, or it's going to come back and bite us. And the other thing is, I understand that Gottfried and Norman have opposed this.
And Rosenthal also.
And that is true then. So what reason do they give?
Let me keep on getting people speaking. Next would be, who hasn't spoken yet, JD.
Thanks. I have to reframe this whole discussion. From what I understand, the housing crisis, the affordable housing crisis is statewide. It's everywhere. I don't think we should be relied on, or we should even think that we can solve that problem. And I don't think, frankly, that it's the job of this community board to solve that issue. I think it's the job of the community board to represent our community and to do what's best for our community. Certainly, we want affordable housing. Certainly, we push for it. But I fear the lifting of the cap could have unintended consequences. I think we should focus on where exactly, if the cap was lifted on residential, that it would be useful for this neighborhood. There may be areas where it would be a good thing and we could get the affordable housing and not endanger the Clinton Special District, the historic districts of Chelsea, or other low-rise neighborhoods. I think that's what we should try to focus on, specifically where it could help us and not open it up to some other push by developers where it could hurt us.
So before I go to, yes, before I go to the next speaker, then can I just get some general consensus about a few things? Do people feel, just by show of hands, do people feel we should be supporting lifting the cap or maybe adjusting the cap? How do people feel about lifting? You can raise your hand. How do people feel about adjusting?
Sorry, Joe, I know I joined late, but I'm not clear on that distinction.
It was discussed in land use that as opposed to a blanket lifting the cap and then it be determined by the municipality, that there could be recommended adjusting it, meaning it's higher, but it's not an unlimited amount that gets settled by the city administration, but the state would say, we're going to move it from 12 up to 14 or whatever the hell it is. I'm talking about not the numbers, but the approach.
Can I ask, could an approach be that the state turns this to the city and it is the city's responsibility to figure out what is the appropriate adjustment that you're mentioning, right, as opposed to just a blanket lift or adjust?
Well, that's one of the problems. Then we send it to the city and the city is subject to the absolute political forces of the real estate development community. Let's be realistic, guys.
Right. No, that's
trying to figure out,
obviously, yeah.
Yeah, how the state can act as a brake. Roberta, you ever thought about this?
So just the question, when we say lifting the cap to unlimited, I want to kind of clarify. Right. I think that there may be just context as to what the cap should be. Like, should it match the area's commercial allowable, or existing commercial FAR or existing commercial buildings? In that case, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. If it's FAR is limited to 14 everywhere, maybe we raise the cap a little bit, I would be more kind of skeptical of the benefits there.
So then the idea is that the idea not of lifting, but allowing it to be adjusted to the highest density FAR in a district, possibly as an idea. Sorry, highest density that exists as of now, because we don't want to incentivize go ahead and gold rush kind of thing. Right.
And allowable that includes commercial and manufacturing densities, not just got it.
Right. Maria, thoughts about that? As kind of a little straw poll.
And I just want to be clear. I think Roberta speaking just helped me clarify it more, though. Lifting the cap or adjusting the number is what one of the questions that you're asking, correct?
Yes.
To be frank, I sort of have the concerns that everybody else has already mentioned. I do think there's benefit to doing this. It's just a question of how. And I think Betty made a good suggestion and point. I mean, even the document that we're looking at, I think has some good points. I hear what you're saying about the real estate developers and really us doing what we need to do for like our constituents and our community members, because the real estate developers aren't like really concerned about us sitting here, right? I wanted to ask one more question and I forgot what it was. Betty mentioned something, and I thought I heard Betty say something about elected officials who were against this proposal from the governor.
Yes.
Can you just briefly mention?
State Senator Brett Hoylman, State Assembly Member Dick Gottfried, and State Assembly Member Linda Rosenthal have all voiced their opposition to this, along with others. But I mean, in terms of our current folks.
And can, like, in a sentence or two, can you explain?
I do not want to speak for them. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
But it raises the same question. What are they objecting to? Like, is there a specific thing? That's what I don't understand.
The board received one response back from Linda Rosenthal, noting that it was all about services and the ability to manage and density. It was sort of a generalized thing that we're talking about tonight. Okay. So can we again try to just do a quick? Roberta's general thought is that there would be an inability to allow a greater residential FAR, but no greater than in the existing commercial FARs. Is that the idea, Roberta?
I think that might make sense as a compromise that would be agreeable to people who are fearful of potential consequences of raising the cap, while also not being overly restrictive and allowing us to unlock some of the benefits of this.
In other words, providing some guidance, but some flexibility at the same time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So just again, in a general idea, how do people feel about that? Just give me what Roberta just mentioned. Does that sound possible? Raise your hand if it's yes. And if it's no. Okay, 3 no's. Okay, 4 no's. Okay, so no, I'm just trying to get a sense to guide the discussion. Going to go to Paul, but our next thing is to discuss, should there be a height limit if there's a cap increase? Because remember, residential buildings, the nature of their floor plates, they go higher than commercial buildings that have big, wide floors, and won't go as high. Paul, you're next.
Yeah, I think I'm in favor of a height limit. Just in general, I like the idea of adjusting and not blowing off the cap entirely. I just wanted to ask you, Joe, is this possibly an opportunity to come up with a plan that might be tailored to just this adjustment of the FAR over decades? People like myself have decried 80/20s because long ago, in the days of the Broadway Initiative and theater air rights, it was my job as chair of the Housing Committee at Actors Equity to traipse around to every meeting I could and get up and say, this is nice, save our theaters, yes. But the 80/20s that people are going to build cut out with surgical precision the people between 80 and 20. That would be all of the actors, all of the stagehands, all of the musicians, except for stars. Is this an occasion when, Joe, it might make sense for us to come up, or at least suggest, an alteration of that plan, that 80/20 is what it is. We've had mentions for over time, but well, what's wrong with a 60/20/20?
So what's happened? Pardon? What's happened, Paul, is that 80/20 program's been reformed into the 75/25 program, meaning 20% at below 80, and then 5% up to 125 of AMI. However, that is being reformed again, because that's tied to 421A. And now the push on the new version, 458W, is pushing it down all to below 60 or 80%. So that's the sort of thing we have to think about as the range of income question, right?
I guess what I'm asking you, Joe, is this discussion about lifting the cap an opportunity to come up with a plan for just that, for properties?
We should as a board say what we want to say, because we are known to be a group that is not afraid to make our point of view known. Would you say, Jeffrey, that's pretty accurate?
People think I brought this just to make there suddenly be 1 million story buildings in the city. The reason for this coming out is to give us an ability to be about policy making. And this really gives us an opportunity to frame things in the way that it's not just objection. So it's exactly that.
Well, Joe, we've been talking about that middle and trying to define it. And I think it's a great idea that along with trying to take care of the folks who are at the lower end of the spectrum, that we think about family. This is our neighborhood. Families, larger apartments for people with kids. Imagine that. this might be an
it's
opportunity.
consistent with we could put this in. It's consistent with our board policy.
Yeah,
about the range of incomes. There's no question.
well, we know the other guys are going to have plans. So,
Yes.
I mean, one with our name on it might be a good idea. Thanks.
So again, just around the room, should we talk about, we don't have to define what that means, but that there should be some sort of height cap that goes with this FAR increase for residential. How do people feel about that? JD? Yes?
It was pointed out at the Land Use Committee that 57th Street, Billionaires Row, if you all know those buildings, the height cap is only 10. And you see how big those buildings are.
No, that isn't a height cap. That's FAR.
FAR is only 10.
Right, the FAR is 10 and it's produced 80 and 90-story buildings, right? So, Roberta?
I think this is another opportunity to maybe talk about contextuality, so nearby buildings. Just on that point in particular, I'm not wildly in favor of a height cap, but I see its utility, and I'm not opposed to it so long as it is contextual with other commercial and manufacturing buildings that surround the nearby area.
So a contextual height cap. How do people feel about that? Adding it in our comments? Show of hands. No height cap. People against that? Height cap? Okay, great. Just again, we're trying to develop something.
Wait, I'm sorry.
I'm not against what Roberta is saying. That's a very good point, but very often, as we know, the developers have what they consider contextual, which can be very broad. So we need to be aware of that.
Oh no, again, I don't think we're down to the exact writing of this. I'm trying to get a sense of how this could be managed in our comments to the board. The next thing is, I think, really not so much, it's our bread and butter, we do it all the time, that affordable housing should be distributed throughout the building, the same finishes, the amenities. I believe this committee's voted for that year after year after year. So are we all on the same page with that? That's a yes. And that there be no poor doors or poor floors and no super expensive luxury condos sitting on top of mixed market and affordable housing. Yes?
Yes.
And
Joe, also there are some, just FYI, attendees who do want to speak on this issue.
Yeah, I'm trying to get the whole committee going. And then, Betty, if you can come to this issue about next.
Well, I don't know if this is the issue you wanted me to talk about, but I think it's not useful to do anything about the affordable housing until there is some, if we're going to put an input on that, it can't just be general. It has to be keyed to the FAR or the square feet or something. And it has to be a percent, like 60% or 70%. It can't be vague if we're going to make a statement about that.
Absolutely. So the next question to discuss, and I want to go to people who haven't spoken yet, which will be, I'm going to try to bring this up, Travis, and then Hector. So should we consider this sort of being able to build more residential beyond 12 FAR only again in locations where that zoning exists today as a test to this? Thoughts? In other words, like in Hudson Yards, where we have commercial FARs up to 24 or 33, that could be repurposed instead of commercial, but to be residential. Let's go to Travis, who hasn't spoken yet.
I need some greater clarity on that one. So you want to test out in those places already? So
today in Hudson Yards, the residential FARs on many locations are limited only to 6, let alone 12.
Okay.
But the overall FARs for certain locations are 18, 22, 24, 33. You cannot build residential beyond 12, beyond 6, let alone beyond 12. So some of those sites might be repurposed to be fully residential or more residential than others. There's only a few locations in our district that have this, and it's mostly in Hudson Yards.
Okay.
No, can I just say that tell me if this is right for those of us who aren't pros in this.
Mhm.
Yeah, Travis, I'm baffled too, I get you. Are you saying, Joe, that a proposal we can consider is that in those areas where there's already higher residential buildings, we could say, okay, in those areas where there's already higher residential buildings, then we would allow the FAR to be higher, not higher than the tallest residential building that exists, but maybe up to that. Is that it?
Almost. So there are 11th Avenue and Hudson Yards, West 34th Street and Hudson Yards, parts of the blocks between 10th and 11th allow very dense commercial buildings. They allow very little residential FAR. There are developers who have sites in those locations who would build more residential if they were permitted by zoning. We're saying, let alone permit them to go up to 12, let them go further than 12, because the underlying zoning allows a higher density today, but it's commercial. You repurpose the commercial FAR that exists, so it's used for residential instead. Is that clearer or better? Yes? And the idea is not to create an incentive for developers to rezone to a higher residential FAR, but to first do something in an area that has a high FAR that exists today, if this change were to happen. Travis, coming back to you.
So going to, after that explanation, which I'm still not quite clear on.
Sorry, guys.
I want to lean into my natural inclination, which is a test case in an area that we know makes sense. Sounds like it's a good idea to me. But that's just my natural inclination now, without fully understanding the logistical cues of this. This is all brand new to me, as Katie saw my confusion when you first presented the concept.
Jessica, your thoughts on this? You haven't spoken yet.
Thank you. I know I joined late and we'll have to kick off early, so apologies. I mean, I think I like that we're getting to a place that is of compromise. I don't think saying absolute no raising, or that, frankly, I mean, I like city control. So I know, I hear you, Joe, that, and I actually, in a conversation I was having with someone else today, commented that real estate is obviously very powerful in the city and will have its way with this. But I nonetheless do value having city control. And so I think that's important to work towards, and agree that a lift, and I really liked Roberta's suggestions about contextual here, the concerns about that's subjective. So maybe there is a cap at some point that we want to look to institute, but kind of merging all those ideas together, I think is a place I'm comfortable.
Dolores, then we'll go to Hector.
Sorry, I know I already spoke. I'm just, with the exception of you, Joe, because this is what you do for a living, is you build affordable housing. There's 13 of us on the screen that are opining that are not experts. We're not land use people. We are also not city officials. We do not have this power. I feel that we're really giving our gut feeling. We're giving.
Which is good.
Well, yes and no. I'm concerned that it's not informed by the broader public in terms of how this may impact each and every one of their the communities in which they live. I mean, I know we live across a broad range, but I still think that we're thinking of a lens of solving affordable housing in the same way that we're trying in a lot of other committees to solve more global, larger problems. I agree with JD that the approach that we're taking right now seems a little scripted towards stating we want X, Y, and Z if we have to, instead of looking specifically at this may be useful in this spot, in that spot, more tied to saying where it can work here and how that benefits our community. And I think that that really still needs more input from our broader community, and drawing upon our previous, which is what you have been doing, our previous positions as a community from larger discussions that we've had. So I just wanted to be on record. I I don't disagree with everyone's objective because again, I live right in an area where I'm around low rises and I'm the highest building in the area. So I know how it impacts people. I'm not against it, but I just think we're all coming from a place that is not as informed as it should be for really opining. That's all. And that
one of the things
me.
we're going
That
to do
includes
is
me.
we're going to talk among the community board members, and I think we're going to have some broader public discussions about this because we really want to get people engaged with it. The committee members haven't spoken yet. Sabrina, you'd be next, followed by Hector. Sabrina, your thoughts? Let's go to Hector and come back to Sabrina. Hector? Hector is not responding. Go to Pete Diaz.
This discussion brings up a lot of anger in me. I was around back in 2008, 2009. I recall a community coming around the Hudson Yards proposals. We worked so hard for affordable housing, the services, the schools, libraries. We got nothing out of that.
We got one school.
One school. The developers got everything. And we're still waiting for the MTA side and the DEP side. Okay. The slaughterhouse, we were promised 100% affordable housing, permanent affordable housing. What are we getting there? Nothing.
No,
discussion.
Please. Pete, one tower is 100% affordable housing and it's permanent. So we did get that.
And this lifting of the cap from 12 FAR to much higher, that was a discussion that was brought up many, many years ago, and we discussed this. We knew what the developers wanted. They wanted higher FARs. The fact that they promise that they're going to build more affordable housing, it's not going to happen. The median income back then was much, much lower. Right now it's beyond, I guess what, it's 86,005, something like that. Most of the residents that lived in this community never got anything out of that. And I'm just seeing a repeat. I don't think the governor knows what's really happening. And that's why we're trying to push to get rid of 421A. And the new plan for the other one, I think it's 438?
458W.
458. Hopefully and even that's not going to satisfy us. The developers got a lot of benefits out of that. The communities, the people in the city of New York didn't get anything out of that. And we know that. That's my concern.
Hector, I'm sorry. Hector, you're next. You there, Hector? Saw you for a moment. If not, we're going to move to the public. And let's go. There are Andrew Berman, bring over Andrew Berman and Paul Devlin. Andrew, there you are, you're on. You're on mute, Andrew.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. So regarding this issue of the FAR cap, I would urge you to think about it a little bit differently than the way it's largely being discussed. The state rule currently is basically a firewall. It's an incredibly necessary firewall. If we allow that firewall to be dismantled, I think the results will be quite predictable. If we put in place these sort of, kind of weaker sort of very subtle distinctions of, well, you can go above 12, but if this and when this, and in these cases, those are going to be incredibly easy to get around, to knock down, to manipulate. The 12 FAR cap that we have right now is incredibly, incredibly important. And that's why groups like Tenants PAC and a whole host of housing and tenant organizations and virtually every elected official who represents this area is against the 12 FAR cap being removed. And I'll tell you a couple of the reasons why. In addition to all of the things that are being discussed, when you increase the allowable FAR, among the other things that you're doing is you're increasing the incentive for demolishing existing housing, including affordable rent-regulated housing. We, and by we, I mean the organization that I work for, I'm a resident of Community Board 4 and have been for the last 30 years. I lead an organization called Village Preservation, which looks at a variety of issues, including exactly this. We're currently conducting a study about the relationship between FAR density and the loss of housing and the loss of affordable housing, especially in Manhattan. And what we see is an almost directly proportional relationship between the allowable density of new development and the loss of rent-regulated housing. So if you're going to be increasing the residential FAR, whatever else you think you may or may not be getting as a result of it, what you're definitely going to be getting is a loss of existing rent-regulated affordable housing. And, one of the arguments that's being put forward, in addition to the, well, it might be a way of getting getting affordable housing, is that in general, we need more housing. Lifting the FAR cap isn't even a guarantee that you're going to get more housing. And let me give you one real life example that we recently had to grapple with, which illustrates a lot of the dynamic behind this. On Fifth Avenue in Greenwich Village, number 1416 Fifth Avenue, are two old 5-story buildings. They used to be row houses. They were joined together, chopped up into apartments, like hundreds of buildings throughout Community Board 4. Had 20 units, 10 of them were rent regulated. They were bought by a developer because the allowable FAR for the site was 10, and they purchased air rights from a neighboring building that allowed to go up to what was in effect 13.5 FAR. They got permission from the city, even though the building was in a historic district, to demolish the 20 units of housing in the 5-story building. They're going to be building a 24-story building, 13.5 FAR, with 17 units, floor-throughs, duplexes, triplexes, and I guarantee you, virtually every one of those units will at best be a third or fourth home to some gazillionaire or overseas oligarch, right, or just a real estate investment. So this is what can also happen when you increase the FAR to these very high levels. You're not even guaranteed to get more housing. You may get less housing as a result, and you're certainly not guaranteed to get affordable housing, as was stated before. The city's rules around mandatory inclusionary housing have certain very particular triggers. Among them is there has to be a substantial increase in FAR, which the city has interpreted to mean a minimum of 50%. So if you have 10 FAR now and you ask to be upzoned to 14 because the 12 FAR cap has been lifted, there's no guarantee that there's even going to be MIH, as if MIH is so wonderful where you get 3 units of super luxury housing for every 1 unit of affordable housing. So I would urge you to really think through all of these implications and to understand why so many local leaders, elected officials, community groups, tenants groups, housing groups are opposed to this. And I would urge you to oppose it as well.
Joe, you're on mute.
Sorry, thank you, Andrew, very much. Paul, you're next.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, everybody. This is a good, robust conversation. It's now my 4th of these, and I'm going to be heading up the Chelsea land use discussion, so I'm getting my fair share of this. I just wanted to put a couple of things into context for your conversation. As was discussed earlier, this is not going to happen this year. It's been taken out of the budget. It's very unlikely that the state is going to say, remove, give the city the ability to go above 12.0 FAR for residential. So this conversation will continue on for many months. We'll make various recommendations. So, the sky's not falling right now. So let's be thoughtful about this. The recommendation I made to Hell's Kitchen Land Use Committee is, and as Andrew Berman just pointed out, try to think like a developer. Try to think like somebody who's going to work their way around these things and come up with a solution that, we want to come up with a thing that protects our community. One of the things that, from my perspective, came up, the reason that this is a positive for us is that I'm on the Empire Station Complex Community Working Group. And in that Penn Station redevelopment, the state is proposing development rights of up to 30 to 30, well, they started at 33 FAR, they're down to 30 FAR. We're trying to push for affordable housing to be built in that new complex. But the developers don't want to build a 12 FAR building when they can build a 30 FAR building. So we're restricting our ability to include more affordable housing in the Empire Station Complex because of this 12 FAR cap. So that gives a little bit of context that's different from what Andrew just talked about, which, I'm not disagreeing with Andrew with his arguments, but I'm saying, let's look at both sides of this coin and think about what it is that we want to do. And I think that, Betty's thoughts are very strong in that if this happens, what could be, X equals Y formula. I think the triggering of an EIS is a perfect example of something that could happen at the state level. But I want us to also think about if we ask the state to put in a whole series of restrictions, we're basically negating home rule because we're saying to them, this, and this have to happen in order for anything to go above a 12.0 FAR. That's not a position we often take when we ask the state to be more restrictive to us in any formula. So as we think through this, to think about what language we would want at the state level, and then what language we would want at the city level. And the city level is where we can get into this neighborhood and that neighborhood, or this block or that block. But I think to help think through this is to say, if we support an increase in the number, we go from 12 to 14 or 18, or we just say to the state, it can be removed, but anything above a 12.0 FAR triggers an EIS or triggers a requirement for affordable housing without too much restrictive language, and let the city navigate through that process. So it's sort of my overview thoughts on that.
I'd like to bring over Carl Wilson and Christine Berthet. First to Paul. I think the key word Andrew used was firewall. And here we're trying to balance both state and city jurisdictions. And I would truly caution the committee to believe with home rule, we will be able to solve everything, because the real estate industry is stronger in the city of New York than even in the state of New York. So we want to put some firewall provisions that cannot be, you're right, Paul, it's a very different thing from our usual stuff. Some firewall provisions that could not be overridden by the city if the right lobbyists are in charge. Next one is Carl Wilson, followed by Christine Bertet. Carl, you're up.
Oh, let me turn my camera on. Sorry. Hi, everybody. Thank you. This has been a really thrilling kind of discussion about something that is very technical, and obviously people have a lot of, very passionate feelings about on both sides. I have just a couple of questions, and forgive me if I should know the answers to these, but are there examples of lifting an FAR requirement in other cities or other places that has worked? I mean,
we are in a unique position, Carl. This is a New York thing, because most people never get anywhere near a 12 FAR of anything in any part of the nation. I mean,
so it's specific. It's totally specific to concerns here. So there's no other examples that are comparable.
Right.
But we're also not opining on a specific piece of legislation or act tonight, though. right? This
There
is
was
a
a
sort of
proposal
high
by the
level.
governor.
Yeah.
There was a proposal by the governor that the legislature has not put in the budget, so therefore it's not moving. But it started the discussion, like Paul said. It's good to have this discussion because we don't want anything to come at us, we can't respond to.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that instead of crafting like very specific bits of legislation or law or policy tonight, I mean, I think the board has raised some like high level, really good and very warranted concerns about what the long-term effects of something like this might be. But I don't know if making a decision tonight that we're for it or against it is really the right thing to do.
No, we're not.
I think that no.
We're in discussion mode.
I know that. I know. I'm just saying, I think that we should collect some, higher level concerns about this. And then when, it's come around time to really opine on it in a more technical way, that would be a good way to sort of list some high concerns that we have without totally closing ourselves off to, what could possibly be a solution to a very difficult housing problem. And this board's always has a long history of shaping the discussion. And I think you have an opportunity to do that here as well, without cutting off another approach to maybe solving affordable housing, which we tend to do multiple ways at once. So I just hope we're not totally closing ourselves off from being open to an FAR lift in the future. That's all.
Doesn't sound like it from the group tonight. Christine, you're next.
Yes, thank you. Very good discussion. I think I heard multiple flavor of that, but I think we want to be maybe pretty narrow on where we would apply that, and first as a statement, it would go where you have an FAR existing, right? And maybe we could do a pilot on Hudson Yard and Penn and say those two areas are clearly ready for it. They need it. And rather than proposing something for the whole city or the whole state, I think JD and Dolores mentioned that, maybe we could take a look at those two areas and say, look, this is the program we would like to see in those two areas, and describe a program that may be a pilot, right? That may be a pilot for next year or 2 years from now. So that I would suggest that maybe we put our head, because if we do that, and it's really where we came from, right? It really remove a lot of concern from the other areas. You just say, these are two specific areas where we know we can do good. And why don't we try to structure a program for those two areas? The second thing is that trying to think, as Paul said, as a developer, I wish. I was thinking about, we want to say, maybe we want to say, look, it's only rental business here. It's not co-op, it's not condos, it's not Russian and Chinese, all kinds of money. It's really rental, and everything you build in those buildings is rental, which immediately reduce the attractiveness of making insane amount of money for the developers, right? And then we apply also, we say we want a certain percent, let's say 40%, but it applies to everything. It applies, and then we start to apply it for the commercial section to everything, right? So now it makes it a little more expensive again and a little better for us. And so I think the height cap is probably a very good idea. And so if you, and maybe the way to do it for the time being is a special permit, a special permit which has to comply with certain requirements and really get people through that. And for those two areas, we ask the state to make an exception. It's not a lifting for everybody, but it's a lifting for those two areas, because if they don't lift it, we can't do anything locally, right? So it kind of goes together. So maybe that's a way to look at it and make it very specific and create a pilot. And we are so good at doing that, create a pilot, then the other district look at it, say, oh, that's a good idea, and they go do it. So that's my thought based on what I heard.
Thank you very much, because we're developing this in every meeting a little bit more to think about how we can respond. The last speaker is Katie Savage. Can you bring her over, Nellie? And then we'll just conclude, and I'll sort of give the bullets of where we came to tonight. And we'll move on to our next item.
I have to be rude and bow out because I bought tickets to the theater 3 months ago. And I couldn't change the date of them. So I just want to apologize for not being able to hear for the summary, but thank you everybody for this conversation tonight. I'm thrilled I could be here to listen, and I look forward to continuing this in the weeks and months ahead. So have a great night, everybody. To the theater I go.
Thanks, Jeffrey.
Sure.
Katie, you're up.
Enjoy.
Hi. Katie Savage, resident of CB4, local trash queen and all of that. It's been really interesting attending more community board meetings over the last 2 years to know more about this stuff. I'm not knowledgeable, I'm not an expert in housing and all that, but I'm an intuitive person and I have, anecdotal things. I lived on 36th Street and 9th Avenue right outside the Lincoln Tunnel entrance for 8.5 years. I was always, anytime a building on that block was up for sale, paranoid. Every building was going to get bought, plus the parking lot on the corner knocked down to build high rises. Always thought that. Even to this day, I live in the Clinton Special District, but my building finally painted the walls for the first time in 8 years in the hallway. And I was concerned that they were selling it. Because this is the reality. I think the board needs to focus on reality and not an ideal situation. Because we have learned time and time again that we do not live in an ideal world. And I think we really need to realize that, again, a lot of people on these boards may not be experts in this specific stuff, but we need to hear from the experts. We can't have people just making decisions that affect the entire community based on their feelings or potentially political things, because to me, this feels like a very political discussion. And I didn't think that's what the community board was about. Also, in regards to, this is a really complex discussion, and we've seen how common it is for misinformation and how easy it is for misinformation to be spread. For example, the MTA site. On the full board meeting, when we had that public hearing, most of the people that spoke were saying things that were inaccurate. And it's a real problem because we just have these snippets, and we live in a time, and especially, when we have these things on Zoom and people can go back and watch, maybe they don't watch everything and maybe they should, but we have to battle that misinformation machine and make sure that the facts are what are really going out. And then also, as far as density and all of that, Long Island City, the whole Amazon hub and all that stuff they wanted to put in there. Was there housing with that also? Haven't there been other places where they want to build all this housing and they keep saying we don't have the infrastructure? We already have a density issue. And it sounds like the only thing that's talked about are the emergency services and schools and stuff. But I'm going to say, what about sanitation? We already cannot manage the amount of garbage we have because all of the garbage built vertically has to come down to street level. We do not have the infrastructure. I don't know how Manhattan is still afloat. We have too much stuff on it. And I get that we need housing, but at what point is it there are just too many people here and they have to stop coming? We can't keep building our way into some fix when it just changes. Hudson Yards completely changed the fabric of that neighborhood. I mean, I lived there for 8.5 years. It's the reason I was kicked out of my apartment, because instead of selling that 5-story building, they took my 1-bedroom apartment and turned it into a 2-bedroom apartment and basically doubled the rent for a walk-up building looking out at the Lincoln Tunnel, $3,700 a month in 2013. I don't even want to know what it costs now. So I just think we really need to think realistically and understand how often the city has gone back on their word. And even if there are situations where maybe this does work, we have to assume that more often than not, we will be screwed. And we really need people that are experts who fully understand this and are unbiased third parties. I don't know if that even exists, but we need people who can explain it and make sure the public understands it in a comprehensive way, and not just these like flashpoints of, oh, affordable housing, affordable housing. That's it. Thank you.
Katie, thank you very much. It's always good to have a final speaker bring us down to realities. We're trying to figure out what the hell to do here.
I'm the every woman of Hell's Kitchen.
So I just want to bring us this. This is the first part of a discussion that's going to go on for a number of months. When it was thought there was action in the budget for March 31st, we got to act quickly. We don't. We're having a public discussion. I think part of the discussion tonight came out that we should probably be having some public like forums or meetings too, to get the broader community to add into this whole thing. Roberta, one more comment before I go into the quick summary, which is not a vote about it. It's just like sort of summarizing our thoughts tonight.
I did want to provide a nonpartisan, unbiased study that was conducted in 2018. I wanted to recommend it. It was conducted by the Regional Plan Association. I have read it. If you Google Regional Plan Association FARCAP, you should be able to find it. I think there's a pretty decent balance there about the potential pros and cons. I see value in reading that. I would recommend it to other members of the board and the public to engage on this topic. And then just one final comment, if you'll allow me. Supply constraint, as people like move in, rents go up, that puts an immense amount of pressure on market rate renters. And if people are not going to stop moving here, unfortunately, however you'd like to say that. So I think if we don't meet the need that winds up occurring in the neighborhood, then we'll continue to put people at risk of displacement, specifically people who are market rate renters.
Before we go to the sum up, just to note though, however, as JD said, it is not our district that is the sole solution to the entire affordable housing crisis in the city, but we're going to get answers to things that might work here. We always try to create balance. So here are the points I picked up, and please add in more if you feel I've missed something. Betty mentioned maybe there should be an EIS requirement if you go more than 12 FAR residential. That people felt, yes, adjusting as opposed to just blanket removing the FAR residential cap, but within the existing zoning that exists today, to not make sure there is no incentive. How that works in zoning is you literally say, before a certain date of the law, if it exists, you're okay, but you can't do it afterward. That's how you get protected. There we have our normal issues about affordable housing, distribution throughout, and that it should be the same amenities and the same finishes. Discussion of a height cap in terms of the surrounding locations. That then Christine Berthet brought up the idea that it should be only for rentals, not condos, to disincentivize that idea of the unregulated oligarch rental purchase idea. And maybe we should talk about it in our district where it could work. A lot of talk about Hudson Yards, and then sort of a pilot program or thought about this within Hudson Yards or around Penn. JD?
Yeah, very good, Joe. Just two things I'd add. One is that there was a need for more community discussion, not just among us. And secondly, I would add that there are a lot of questions that were raised, a lot of possibilities. I have no idea tonight if some of them are even feasible. So I think we need more discussion about some of those proposals. Could they be done or could they not?
So yes, we're going to definitely note the idea of a public forum and get the public discussion going about this. Does that represent everybody roughly the points that we talked about tonight? Betty, yes?
Well, I just think that if we want to raise affordable housing, that we just have to have some kind of percent or tie-in or something, that it's not just a vague concept.
Got it. Travis?
You're on mute, Travis.
You're on mute, Travis.
Once a day I do that. I'm sorry. 2 years. I heard a distrust of the developers and the politicians on this topic based off previous experiences and previous times where we've been burned. And I don't know if there's a way to be quite clear about the need for actual quid pro quo here. Any conversations with those folks going forward to actually hold them to their word?
Well, what I want to note, we've learned over many years, it's not just about a commitment to do X, that there must be a space and there must be funding for it. If you don't have both at the time the agreement is made, you get nothing in the end. So there's a provision in Hudson Yards. You can go a little bit taller on the east side of 10th Avenue if you leave space for a public facility. It doesn't define what the public facility is. Developers came to us and said, we'll build 10,000 square feet that you could use sometime in the future. And our community board was like, no, we're not going to leave a box with no funding or use. It's got to be specific, you know. And that was, I think, the lesson. I will tell you, I was on the board for Hudson Yards in 05 and 09. The lesson I learned is there should have been the fire station, the police station, the library, everything cited, not necessarily built out, but that location found at everything throughout all this massive building, in addition to just the one school that we got. So you knew that as the neighborhood grew, there was the location
infrastructure
and available, because once the property values go up, those spaces are never available again.
Right.
They're just gone. I think we had a really robust discussion. It was almost an hour and a half, which is pretty good. I think we're going to go, Maria, turn it over to you for the social service checklist. How's that sound?
If I'm going to be honest, it does not sound good right now. Yeah, my battery's decreasing. Okay, so Joe, do you want to put it on the screen?
Yes,
or
yes, I have it ready.
Okay, so hopefully you guys were able to look it over. I do have already some things that I wanted to, I'm not the latest version I saw is the one that we have. And there were some things that I think maybe we need to modify or edit. One thing that I think up front, we talked about this a little bit, not here, but I know Katie talked about it. Joe, you and I discussed it a little bit about what would be the, like coming up front. I forgot what it's called. Like the preface for this checklist.
Mm-hmm.
And Katie, do you want to just very briefly share with everyone what it is, or tell everyone what it is you had suggested? What your thought was?
Well, I guess I thought it would be super helpful, maybe even like long before we even get into the sort of specifics about wording or how many questions we want or anything, is to sort of just better understand what the timing and the purpose of this is. And to be honest with you, I feel like we have so many good ideas here, and I feel like we're trying to cram them all into one document, and it doesn't actually make sense. So my understanding, Joe, from something you had said a little while ago, is that your hope is that this would be a document that could be given to providers when they are, as soon as they are thinking about responding to the cities or DHS's like RFP or something. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, in other words, if a provider is proposing a project, we're thinking about proposing a project, we say, please put this together and send it to us to start discussion so you can get informed about the local lay of the land and we can respond to you. That's the general idea.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so for example, just like, and to go back to somebody had said in the last discussion about like keeping this real world, this would be therefore even sooner than what we had Housing Works do for their last proposal, right? So they did that.
It's totally outside of anything we've ever done before. Everybody we've worked with from the day Breaking Ground was called Common Ground, they came to a committee, they made a presentation before they picked up a hammer or saw a penny. they came and see that was there understanding or public desire and community desire to help work with them.
Right. So that was my understanding, so that we want them to actually come to us early so we can have this discussion with them. If that's the case, if that's what the goal of this document is like, hey, everybody, we want you to come talk to us and here are the things that are on our mind that we want to discuss with you. I think if that's the goal of this document, I think that we are asking for information that they won't even have yet. Who are the providers? What are their licenses? How many square feet of this and that and that? And I feel like maybe we have to think about 2 documents.
But Katie, you should know, in the Business and License Committee with liquor licenses, they frequently say, not yet decided, to be determined, blah, blah, blah. That's the process.
Right. I mean, we could give them a document that they then say that to for many of the questions, but I guess I'm just,
can I interrupt you, Katie, just for a second? Because I did ask for brief, intentionally.
Yeah.
So I just want to take a step back. And so what Joe said as the goal for this document, I would agree. I would also add to that about the part that we have term limits now, and we are going to be losing institutional knowledge. And I think it's behooves of us to have this document. And if you don't know all the answers, that's okay. But these are the things that we as a community board are interested in knowing. And for things that you can think about moving forward as an organization that we would like to know about. And I think that, I have to attend, we discussed this already. There's a lot of meetings that I have to attend in this community. Dolores has done some of them. Leslie Williams has done some of them with other nonprofits in the community when there are issues, right? And so there's things that I have learned along the way. And when in a few years, when I'm no longer on this board, and Dolores will probably be off the board before I am, so is Joe. And when there's newer members, this document helps to guide the members. And I hear what you're saying, and it is a lot in one document. I do think, I'm sort of curious what everyone else's thought is about having 2 separate documents. I really do think it just should be one, and let's not make things more complicated, and they need to be one document with all the questions that we are going to have. And if you can't answer them, just like on BLP, that's okay. And what I was hoping you would mention, Katie, is that I thought that would be useful is actually, you talked about the who, what, when, where, how, why, kind of that we should be able to put up front.
Right.
And I think that that's good and makes sense.
Yeah. And I do think that we definitely need clarity as to because I think right now we say something like, social services, but clearly we're not asking, we're not asking senior centers to do this or schools. I think we have to be really clear about who it is that we're asking to do this. And so, all right. So do you want to just go question by question? Is that how you want to do it?
Well, let's hear from Dolores, had a point, and then JD.
So first a question, are we voting on this version, the final version this evening?
I think our goal was to have it as much as possible. And I think Katie's point is sort of an executive summary thing up front, right? Sort of.
Right. No, that was a selfish thing. Like Jeffrey, I actually have tickets to the Irish Arts Center, but I'll be late. My friend is performing, but it's 2 hours long. So I'll catch her at the end. Katie, you're concerned.
Dolores, this is recorded. Your friend is going to hear that. Just keep that in mind.
She lives in the community, but I very much doubt she's going to go to the YouTube.
All right, focus.
And
I'm
she
sorry.
lives in an affordable housing unit built by Related. Okay, so that's good.
Okay.
So Katie, the concerns that you're bringing up are probably the same thing that happened when the board ended up creating the document for BLP. It's not a legal document. No one who comes is beholden to it. But what it does is it telegraphs what's important to the community. And so even if somebody is not filling out all the details, it's two-way information. It's providing information about what are the things that are real important for this community to understand, so that the dialogue that we want to happen early and often is framed without it just being a blanket presentation of someone coming in, not recognizing at all that this is what we believe in, or these are some things that we're concerned about. So I think it's a great guide. I don't think that it's going to burden a lot of organizations, because I think they'll recognize that it also gives them a framework to understand what community are they trying to come into. I think a preamble is always important. I mean, we have a preamble in front of our affordable housing plan, which is updated because it's living, breathing documents that just gives a guideline of we welcome social service in the community to help alleviate some of the problems of our residents, as well as those broadly. Here are some of the things that we're looking to do, whatever that is. And I think that it is, if we think about it as a legal document or that it's a burden and we create like everything exactly with perfection, it's sort of useless. I think this is a great communication to social service communities overall to say, here's what this community board 4 is focused on. And if you have the information as much as possible, give it to us so that we can go ahead and talk through some potential issues and problems.
AD?
Yeah, I think Katie was talking about a preamble. I think that's an excellent idea, and I think that can cover a lot of the questions. We can welcome them, just like Dolores says, and so this will be helpful to them. So I agree with Katie. Let's have a preamble.
Paul? I'm sorry, Leslie.
Yeah, I think this is a very good document because it certainly provides a roadmap and it gives expectations for the provider. And it also lets the community know to expect that there's certain standards that the board seeks. I mean, talking about our own experience here, it would have been important for us to have had this done in advance of having our situation.
Meaning Lantern.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Paul and then Betty.
Yeah, I think like a lot of you folks, I've sat through a lot of meetings over the last couple of years, and we all know there are good, bad, and different providers of social services. And since there are only 2 community boards that have more of these outfits operating than we do, I think I'm not at all shy about getting together the most thorough list and at least presenting it to them and asking them to please give us all the information right now up front. I don't want to sound too angry about it, but I think it would be a good thing. And over time, I'm sure, like with all the other policies that I think we have done very well with, like, for instance, the details about affordable housing, the conversation will be ongoing. And I think that we'll come up with what we think of our list and what we think of the providers and how they respond to it. So there are some very good providers out there, thank God. And there are others that are just, they shouldn't be in this line of work. I'm not at all shy. I wrote back to the meeting today and said, I thought it was a very good, thorough list. I'm fine with it being thorough as hell. And we'll be reasonable about it, but I'd much rather have the conversation start on that footing that, oh, you didn't give us that information because we didn't ask for it. I'd rather be cautious and ask them everything. Thanks.
Betty? And then Travis?
So I have some gentle suggestions for the document. So I wasn't sure if I should give them now, or are you going to go through it page by page?
I think we don't have the time to do page by page. Just talk about it in general, because so far we've added, it's a preamble, a list of what social services apply, and maybe some sort of like executive summary thing up front. So it's really clear.
Well, I'm for all those things. I just thought there were some clarifications that might be useful. I won't tell you all the things, but the thing that on page 7, there's a whole long list. I think that services and physical details of the building are mixed in together, and it would be good to distinguish those, because it's a little confusing to have services and physical spaces mixed in together. So that's just my only major thought. So there were a couple of other picky things, but I could give that to you guys later.
Travis, and then Travis.
I was going to say I also support the robust nature of the document, how thorough it is. I think we spoke about this in a previous meetings, that service providers are accustomed to having to provide detailed responses, and I do like the fact that it provides institutional knowledge for future members. As someone that's new to this work with this committee, It became very early in working on this document to see how the culture is shaped or how we're looking to shape the neighborhood. And I think this translates that going forward.
For members who haven't spoken yet, Hector, Pete. Go ahead, Hector.
Yeah. As far as this provided checklist, I do understand the wisdom of having such a thing, and it does set a precedence for any other developers that come along. Obviously, as time progresses, we're going to have, I mean, this will be modified, I assume, right?
Right, yes.
As events require. Basically, it's pretty inclusive. I think it's a nice little setup that you guys put together here. I mean, from what I reviewed, I do have a question concerning as far as nonprofits being involved in here, social services providers. Is there going to be any like a list provide? I mean, is it going to be like a requirement that they provide a list of some of the associated nonprofits they use in the area, like Hudson Guild will refer possibly to, you know, for example, to another organization for mental health therapy or stuff like that. I mean, some of the providers that they utilize or plan to use, is that going to be on here as well?
Normally it talks about where do your services come from, and you got to detail either you provide them or someone else provides them. So you would list that, yes.
Yeah, because I saw some of it was crossed out here, and I was just wondering if that was going to be.
I think the crossing out is more about reorganizing the document as opposed to not asking the question.
Gotcha. Okay, that was my concern as well, because some of the health providers in the area are not. I don't know. Some of them, you know, depending on who moves into takes over the development, or you know, whoever the developer ends up being, their providers are somewhat distant, so to speak. And I guess a part of that has to be find out how do they get the elderly or the disabled to these locations. And I think
this is very much why we would ask these questions, because then you'll get an answer. Right, exactly.
Okay, that's pretty much all I need to say. But all in all, it's pretty good done.
Pete?
I think the document looks fine. Having some experience with the service providers, we have to, you know, hold them accountable for whatever they plan in this community. We can always add on other items in the future, so it's nothing that a recommendation.
Okay. Sabrina and then Josephine, thoughts on the document? Sabrina?
If at all.
Anything.
Josephine?
Yeah.
I mean, I overall think it looks pretty good, and thanks, Mary, for your work on it. I know, you know, and seeing it for the first time, even for me, it was a little bit jarring, but given the fact that so much has happened, learned a lot of lessons learned, and I think it is important to have it in a document somewhere. And I also think it could be very useful to a social service provider to let them know that, you know, these are some of the things that we're looking at, and hope that you're looking at them too. So I don't see any issue with that. So I'm fine with it.
Sabrina, then Roberta. Let's go with Roberta because I don't see Sabrina.
Echoing some of the notes that other folks have said previously, I appreciate the comprehensiveness of this. I see value in adding a explanatory preamble. And just a question, have we beta tested this with, I know that some folks here are effectively beta testers, but yes. With folks who are regular submitters of RFPs. And that would be the only thing that I would.
This is a minor submission compared to what you submit for a contract RFP. Yeah. This is like a small, tiny piece of a milkshake that you must do to get for an RFP.
Amen.
So it's not a seal of approval is what we're saying.
Oh my God, it's so much easier. But what I would note, I think, although it's going to drag it on one more month, I think we should bring the preamble back with the final document, have a sort of stamp of approval. So we settle it at this committee before we go to the full board. We worked so solid on this already. Let's bring it to conclusion, because I want to make sure that we have consensus on all the wording and everything. Does that make sense to folks? Okay, good. Katie has a word, yeah.
So I guess my question is about the specific questions though. So you're saying that we'll review the preamble and stuff next month and make sure that we're all on board with that. So that'll get drafted and submitted to us, I guess, ahead of time so we can review it, discuss it.
Oh, yes, 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 yes.
But I still have some questions about specific questions.
So,
Like,
so
for example,
ask them now, because I'm going to try to, after this, we're going to sort of accept everything as the edits,
well then,
you know.
okay. So very specifically, there's one that says, was there law enforcement involvement in other facilities, medical or violation of law? That strikes me as naive and odd and oddly worded in a variety of ways. So I guess I think we'd have to be sort of thoughtful about this.
Can I answer the question for you? Can you ask me this for a moment?
Yeah.
So I'm an applicant. Ask me the question.
Joe, and I guess in any facility that anybody in your organization has ever run, has there ever been law enforcement involvement, medical or violation of law?
Okay, so we manage a number of units that have housed the mentally ill, and there are frequently issues with law enforcement. There are also people who have active drug use, and there has been law enforcement. And to say that doesn't prejudice anything whatsoever, because you as a social service provider are giving the context. So that's why I think it's an appropriate question.
Okay, but I guess my question is, so how is that question helpful? We all know.
Because we have had people conceal it from us in the past and say everything is peachy keen with no problem. It's important to get the providers down to earth and be realistic and thoughtful.
I think also it provides insights into how they handle those issues. So so if they're forthcoming with that answer, they also can disclose how they tend to handle those issues with their residents and with the services they provide. And that distinguishes them from other providers who may be derelict in their duties.
So, you know, Katie,
I guess maybe there's just, I guess my point is there's a different way of asking it, because I think we look silly asking, has there ever been? Because of course there is.
No, it may be a daycare center that says, and in fact, we've never had an issue with that. But I think the other part of the question that Travis just brought up is, and how have you managed that? And if so, how have you managed it?
Right, and that we don't ask here.
I know, that's I'm glad it's having this back and forth. Yeah, that's the point.
Yeah, that's my point. I think we have to rephrase this. But actually, something that Joe you just said is another question I had. So we aren't clear, and this goes back to what Maria said earlier about what I had said. We're not clear about the who is, about who we want this to go to. Like, so you just said maybe it's a daycare provider. So are we sending this to do we want any senior center? Because the way the questions are, like in the beginning, it looks like we're only asking people who provide residential services. Is that so? Who do we want to do this?
Right. So I thought we should put a list of the kinds of providers we're talking about in our preamble. Right. That's a great thing. The second thing is do some document organizational reorganization that talks about residential versus just services, so it's clear, right? Because there are, and therefore, you know, if it's X, only complete section A. If it's B, if it's Y, complete section B. That was my thought as I was listening to people talking earlier. So that was my, I think everything's there, but we need to reorganize it in a little different way. Because we are going to get people coming to us saying, Hudson Guild came and presented the new senior center down at Fulton. So we're going to want to ask them questions, understand what it is. And they fill something out, it helps us get an informed information in advance so we can ask the right questions.
Okay. And then my last question about a specific question is the one where it says list any other social services within 2 blocks or something. I guess I'm wondering, I think it would be helpful if we said whatever they happen to be providing. Let's say it's daycare. are there any other daycare centers on this block or within a 2-block radius? But I don't understand how it's helpful to us or them or anybody for them to go through the drill of identifying every single social service, any social service agency within 2 blocks. Because in New York City, my God, anywhere we happen to live, that's a lot.
I think
So-
people need to demonstrate they know the neighborhood that they're coming into. That's the whole point of this. And it doesn't matter what it is.
But for their service, right?
No. Go ahead, Dolores, you answer. I'm sorry.
So Katie, what we found, especially with the BLP checklist, what it's real helpful is so that someone may have put together a plan for a particular service. And once that they actually discover, oh gosh, there's a lot of this and this, they may make adjustments already. It's helpful to someone coming into the neighborhood, specifically, as Joe said, understand where you're coming into so that it may adjust your programming or your design, et cetera. But also
so for BLP, do we ask them to identify every single
Yes.
BLP related thing in a 2-block radius?
Because there's a 500-foot rule, yes.
500 feet.
Maybe we can email that out.
The other thing I wanted to mention is Katie, and Joe and Maria, correct me if I'm wrong. We're not going to be sending this out to someone. This will just be posted on our website, which means it's telegraphed to anyone. And if someone says, hey, we're looking to, or we're thinking about bringing in a shelter into your community, our district manager would direct them to those resources, which are available to everyone. It's telegraphed to everyone what it is that are our priorities and what type of information that we look for as a community. So I don't think that we're going to be singling out to send to the daycare, et cetera. It's just going to be broadly posted. Is that correct, Joe?
Yeah, well, a little bit different. I wanted to mirror what BLP did. When we first had that questionnaire, we sent that out to all the liquor license attorneys to say, this is something we're doing new. So like the first go, it's through a broad range of, hello, social service organization. Going forward, Community Board 4 is using this whole process and questionnaire. And then we post it on the website that says for social service organizations, so it's both, Dolores, right? Just get the word out initially, Some further questions, Katie, on this?
I'll go back and look at it right now, but not for the moment.
Okay. And Sabrina,
Joe?
you were.
Oh, well,
Yes,
Sabrina's.
I
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
she can
sorry.
speak.
Yeah, I don't have great communication here. Just going to say that I have no comments and I support the letter as it is.
Okay.
I did not understand what you said. Did you, Maria?
Yes, I did. She actually is texting me. She's having internet issues. She says she does support this checklist, but she is also leaving early. And if she's not here when we vote, she's voting at full board in support of it, whenever that is. Joe, so there are some things that I think some of the language, there's certain questions that to me seem like they're getting into the weeds, and they're questions that normally would be discussed at CAB. So for example, at a CAB meeting. So for example, describe, if at all, please describe the supervision and training of staff. And so I'm curious if we should leave that there. I think it is better to have more than less, but I do feel like that's a question that we would be discussing at a CAB meeting. Even, for example, the question about law enforcement involvement, which I do think we need to change the language, but even that question, when we were at a CAB meeting, that came up. And I'm not saying we should take it out, but I'm curious about what you think. There's other things too, some other language, where it says project and program. I think we should pick one and say project or say program. Yeah, I'm curious about what you think. There's some of the things in here that I'm a little curious how it got in here, and some of the language in here.
Well, again, this document has not changed all that much. We've been adding things to it as opposed to subtracting pretty much as we started in the last couple of months. I would say that that training and preparation is important to know, because you want to have a sense of what people's internal programs are for training when you're, in qualifications. That's not a new idea for social services. Travis, am I making that up?
Sorry, Joe. I had my internet broke up there.
I said, Maria, repeat the question so Travis can hear it.
I'm saying that some of the questions in the checklist, it almost seems like it's getting into the weeds, into the really detailed kinds of things, and wondering about those things possibly being in a cap. For example, describe the supervision and training of staff. So I need to hear somebody else's thought about it instead of my own brain.
When it's a cab, the project's already done. So we're trying to get information in advance. Travis,
okay,
thank you. Isn't it normal that social service organizations have to describe supervision and what kind of training they have? Isn't that like a standard thing?
Like when you put in a bid, that you usually ask for all types of like training, supervision, progression plans.
Thank you. Perfect. That satisfies, that makes sense to me as part of it. I didn't realize that has to go into the bid. Okay. Thank you. And then Joe, page, I don't even know what page this is. Oh, 7. It mentions social service providers services. And some of these things I'm a little curious, like community and recreational activities, and then it says and socialization groups and like health, home care, referrals. These are 2 different lines. I'm sorry, JD.
Is this a committee discussion? If it is, since we're going to have a preamble at our next meeting, would it be better to raise those issues so we can all weigh in on it?
Right, but JD, we were trying to settle the whole question portion today, so we only deal with the preamble and the executive summary.
So I wanted to make a motion towards that,
yeah,
Joe,
right.
Because I think that one of the issues is we may not have the cleanest version, even though it's in the documents. So what I was going to make a motion is that Betty had already some edits and things and suggestions. Katie had some ideas on some changes of language, etc. Can we get those sent while we're not in the meeting? Create a clean version, send that out. We can look at that, and that could be just the minor tweaking along with the preamble, because I think right now there's too many red lines in the document, etc. And then we're not quite sure whether we should be wordsmithing or whether we're have concerns over the overall topic. So that's my motion, is that we do that offline and bring it together in the next meeting.
Is there a second to that?
Oh, I can't second it. Sorry.
Betty seconded. Perfect. Okay. I think we have consensus here. So all those in favor of taking this document, bringing this portion to final, doing some tweaks, and then come back with preamble and executive summary. I see hands going up saying we're happy. Okay.
Good.
That is unanimous. Perfect. All right.
Thank you, Dolores.
And by the way, folks, I think we've done pretty good on editing and putting together a huge document over Zoom, right? That's not the easiest thing to do. So it's been months, but it's pretty good. The hour is now 8:28, so we're at the second hour.
Sorry, new business.
Real quick. We still have more business. That's our problem.
I thought we
Dolores, do you need to leave?
I do, but I just wanted to let folks know about the Midtown Community Court. If you had not seen the announcement, after months of us advocating, it will be opening, and also there'll be a misdemeanor mental health court that will be opening. So we're not getting all of the services that they offer, but the good news is that we will have some solutions on intervention and hopefully providing services for those that need it, and hopefully ultimately creating some more of that balance in the community. So,
and we should note that this was disclosed to us by Tamika Amar, the chief judge of the criminal court, in the meeting Maria and I had with Jesse, with her about 2 months ago, and it's actually coming to pass. It's amazing that someone made a commitment. It's actually happening. The other part is, if you saw today, on the same vein, the governor made an announcement about revisiting bail reform. But one of the components of that, which is amazing, is increasing funding for mental health services that we've been honking on for so long now, because you can't do one without the other, right? That's the whole point. So I got to tie together, and increasing diversion. It's almost as if like our letters were sent to the governor and the governor said, good idea, which is shocking. So what I wanted to note at 8:30, we have 2 more items, and I think they need to be deferred yet again, folks, because we're going to be exhausted here, right? So we have the affordable housing plan, which is not something you start at 8:30 at night. And it's got to get sent out again. You got to look at it. So I will say that our ongoing discussion about the FAR stuff sort of pushed the Affordable Housing Plan back. And the same thing for our discussion about the syringe kiosk. So what I'd like to say is that I'm going to request that we are not going to discuss further the FAR cap. It's not at our next meeting. There's no sort of pressure on it, right? We've got our thoughts out there. It's going to keep on going. And we take the Affordable Housing Plan, which is so local and so important for us, as our first item, and then the syringe cap. And hopefully, and I think we have the nurses coming too, Maria, in April.
I believe so.
Right.
The Nurses Association.
Yeah.
I second that.
Roberta, sorry.
Clarifying question that might be helpful for prep. What is the objective with the affordable housing plan? Just to
Right. So
yeah.
So it was last updated in 2019, and we have to get the 2019 version sent to us with the update for 2022, which also says here's where we are, things are completed versus ongoing, whatever, and then any other suggestions we want to put in. Our council member is very interested to hear what other initiatives we'd like to take to get affordable housing produced in the district. So he's pushing it. We also normally would update it every year. Well, we missed 2020 and 2021 for obvious reasons, So
Can Joe, about since I worked on some versions of the affordable housing plan, it's gigantic and has tables and they will have to be updated. I think we'll need a strategy. I mean, I don't see the committee. I don't know how do you have an idea of how you'd approach it?
I have already asked Savannah, the community planner from Clinton Housing, to do the basic updates, which are, this is done, that projects move from section to section, right? That has to just be caught up, right? And then the numbers have to be verified. So we'll look at it in total and then have a broader discussion saying, oh, other things we may want to add in. We may look at it next month, vote on it to say, yes, here are all the updates and things that's accurate. Here's our new version. And now we're going to come back and say, what are other initiatives we can put into this?
Okay, that's good that you frame it.
But Betty, last time we updated, I think we had a presentation of it. We basically literally had a slideshow of the updated version. And that was 3 years ago?
2019.
Okay.
But will the updated version with the updated numbers be ready for next month?
Absolutely. It's already been worked on. It's almost half done.
Oh, okay, good, great, terrific.
And about actually, I would just say about the syringe kiosk letter, like it's slightly odd that it is being.
No, it really isn't. I'm a human being and I've been at it for 2 hours after a full day of work like all of you. And we took a very complex matter and really tried to tease through it. So there is no pressing deadline on this at all. And we need to always deal with things that are pressing deadline. And I quite frankly want to say that the FAR cap doesn't have a pressing deadline either, but it was this push that we would like to talk about it. So we have, and we can just have so many hours in a day, so, but I'm again want to know, and actually maybe we should note, let's put that ahead of the affordable housing plan as the first item on our agenda, because it's going to be much shorter in our discussion than the affordable housing plan. So that will then at least bring it to a close. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Yes,
after our...
there's a second. There's a second. Oh, come on.
We had a very good discussion tonight, and I really appreciate this level of policy engagement. The borough president has said to me that he cannot believe how we conduct ourselves as a board. So just be aware of that it's over and over. Very, very impressed our ability to engage back and forth. Thank the members of the public for coming and sitting through this too. We very much appreciate it. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Maria?
Yes,
Maria,
I saw your texts.
Oh, okay. Joe, I sent Maria some picky things for the checklist.